This panel will discuss issues related to when an NDI notification is not required for new dietary ingredients and whether evolution in the supplement marketplace has altered the impact of this provision. We're going to be hearing from 3 speakers, about 10 minutes each, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A session again. Hopefully it'll be as popular as our last one was. But these speakers are between you and lunch, so I'm sure they'll keep that in mind. First, we're going to be hearing from Michael McGuffin, President of the American Herbal Products Association. Then Ashish Talati, Partner in Amin Talati Napadier. And then Laura McCleary, Policy Director at the Center for Science in the Public Interest. I don't want to take up their time, so I'm going to turn it over to Michael right away. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kara. Thank you, Steve. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today and discussing these issues that, of course, have been troubling us and confusing us and hopefully leading to some progress for us over the last 25 years. And so I was asked to address this issue of the exception for filing of a notification for an article that is a new dietary ingredient, but that is also identified as an article used for food in a form in which the food has not been chemically altered. And this is the language from the law. When DSHEA amended the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, it clearly stated that a supplement that contains an NDI is adulterated unless it meets one of these conditions, the first one being that it is an article used for food in a form in which the food has not been chemically altered, and the second option is submission of a new dietary ingredient notification. And the implementing regulation used exactly the same language, no reinterpretation here at all, very clearly adopted the language from the law. And then, so the first question that we have to ask, I think, is the first phrase, an article used for food. What is an article used for food? It's defined in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act in the United States Code at 321F. Food means an article used for food or drink for man or other animals, chewing gum, or articles used for components in any such article. And there is another place in regulation where this is addressed on the requirements for prior notice of an imported food. FDA gives some examples of foods, and I think that's good to just have this list. The agency does not, in this regulation, say this is an entire list, but these are examples, and this is what there's nothing at all surprising here. These are articles that we think of as food. There are many, many such articles, and one thing that needs to be remembered in this tolerance for an article used for food, there's no geographical limit and there's no time limit. So it's not an article used for food in the United States. It's an article used for food. And it's not an article used for food prior to the passage of DSHEA. It's an article used for food. I'm clear in conversations with the agency over the years that there's agreement, at least on that first part. The agency's never taken a position that this means articles used for food in the United States. I'm not sure that there's been that same degree of clarity on if it's an article introduced for food in 2018, does that grant the exception? I think industry thinks it does, but I don't know that that discussion has ever been had. But these are just examples of where we'll find articles used for food identified in federal regulation, and Bill Franco's brought these up at a meeting a couple of days ago, that these are clearly all old dietary ingredients. These are fairly set regulations. The agency hasn't added to these in decades. And there are 120 botanicals in the natural flavoring, another 80 in spices and other natural flavorings, although there's some duplication there. Some more in essential oils. I like the one at the end, 182.50. If you can get your musk or your civet oil in there, which is used to make things smell good or at least smell like that. Those are clearly articles used for food. Now, I don't know that they would fit one of the definitions of a vitamin, a mineral, amino acid, or an herb or other botanical, but they would fit the dietary substance for use by man to supplement the diet, apparently. So I can see a musk CBD supplement coming in soon just to make the second mention. Interesting, too, so food additives, and one of the things that DSHEA clarified is that dietary supplements are not food additives, but are food additives, articles used for food for the purposes of recognizing that we would have an exemption from an NDI, from a notification if our NDI is a permitted food additive. And there are a number of them, including synthetic flavoring substances and adjuvants and direct food substances affirmed as GRAS. Well, I find it interesting that in FDA's 2016 NDI guidance, they gave us an example in asking the question, the one that I'm discussing here is an NDI notification required for an NDI if it's an article used for food in form in which the food has not been chemically altered? No. And then they give us an example. If ingredient X is a food additive that was approved for use to sweeten baked goods in 1993, but was never marketed as a dietary supplement. Clearly, it's an NDI, but it says because it was, but it's not required to submit an NDI notification because ingredient X has been present in the food supply. I'm not sure that the agency intended to mean that broadly, that food additives in the food supply can be used can be acknowledged as a new dietary ingredient and skip the notification. But again, this example in the 2016 guidance, which don't forget we have rejected out of hand, so we shouldn't say, but we love this paragraph. But nonetheless, this was what was stated by the agency at that time. This is a place that I go, somebody calls me and says, hey, can you find me a recipe that has Schisandra in it? You bet I can. So you can see that there are 4,853 cookbooks available at archives.org. You gotta love the Wayback Machine. And all of these things are out there. Some of them you can directly download, some of them you can borrow, but it's really a great reference for finding old recipes and new. I organized this in two different ways, one by these thumbprints or thumbnails and the other by just, you can organize it by listing. I organized both of these from oldest to newest, but I think that was a little bit of an oversight because I do want to make the point that a new food use apparently also would establish that it's an article used for food. But again, this is a great reference if you just need to go find a recipe that establishes that an ingredient, especially a botanical ingredient, is an article used for food. You can find plenty of recipes for hemp here. I have them in a file. I can't find any recipes for CBD, though. So then what is chemical alteration? I'm going to move to the second half of the sentence. And the Congressional Statement of Agreement was quite clear. It said that chemically altered does not include the following physical modifications: minor loss of volatile components, dehydration, lyophilization, milling, tincture, or solution, water, slurry, powder, or solid in suspension. I say clear. When you read this and you look at the placement of the commas, it gets a little hard to understand quite what a tincture or solution in water, slurry, powder, or solid in suspension means, or where the comma break should be. But I think the agency grappled with this in the 2016 guidance again, and we can take some learning from that. What the Congress did not say is, and that's the end. And so is this a list of examples, or is it the list of all modifications that do not constitute chemical alteration? And that's another issue that we're still trying to sort out, I think. I'm actually going to skip a couple of slides because I think it's better to start here. This is, again, from FDA's NDI guidance. And the balance of my presentation is not to try to sort out all of these things in the 10 minutes that I was given, but to report a snapshot of where we are based on FDA's view of what constitutes chemical alteration from the 2016 guidance. And so here are a couple of slides of what processes for manufacturing a dietary ingredient from an article of food present in the food supply do not result in chemical alteration. And you can see that first bullet point is that FDA says that they consider the list in the Congressional Statement of Agreement to represent examples, but not necessarily a complete list. That's good. And then if you go read the rest of them, the agency did not add any to the list that FDA, or that was in the Congress. So even though they've conceptually stated there may be some, they didn't offer, here's here's an example. All of the rest of these were already in that congressional statement from 1994. A couple of these that I do want to comment on, I think not on this page, but on this page, changing agricultural fermentation conditions to alter the chemical or molecular composition or structure. We're a little nervous about what that means. If I'm harvesting my chamomile usually in June, but I start to harvest it in May, even though my yield will be a little less, but I know that the senecio hasn't germinated by then, and I really don't want the senecio in my chamomile, I hope that the agency doesn't say, oh, that's a new, a change in agricultural practice that results in a new dietary ingredient. I think this is, these kinds of attempts in the guidance to, in my view, broaden as many ingredients as possible that could be defined as needing an NDIN, and not surprisingly, industry would rather narrow that. And I think that kind of, we need to find the balance on those things. We need to still go back to these examples that were given and clarify them. Use of a botanical at a different life stage. You know, the example given here, even this one, I'm not so sure that an unripe apple or a ripe apple, I mean, certainly there are some different measures of compounds in those, lesser sugars, whatever other constituents, but again, it may be a bit of a strained example. The last one on the mycelium, that's actually not a, it's more of a part of the plant which we're all required to address anyway. I'm going to move back up then to the several slides on examples of processes that the agency has said do constitute chemical alteration, a process that makes or breaks chemical bonds. You know, I bake bread every once in a while. There's an awful lot of chemical bonds broken there. Is that what we meant? I'm not sure there's clarity here. Removal of some components from a tincture. So if I remove the pyrrolizine alkaloids from my comfrey extract, is that chemical alteration that results in, that would require a notification? I think it's hard to argue that it would not. And I know that FDA has commented that that exact example probably would be an NDI. Use of solvents other than water or aqueous ethanol. There must not have been an herbalist working on writing this guidance, because they would have known that we might use vinegar, we might use oil, we might use a food-grade oil. There are other solvents, food-grade solvents, that we would not consider to represent chemical alteration that any more than water or aqueous ethanol would. There was an application of nanotechnology. I know that's one that the agency has talked about, not just in the supplement area, but also foods, and concerns about what do we know about the safety of those. There was one other that I thought but I can't find it right now, so I'll skip it and hope I've given you enough to think about it. I think kind of the takeaway is all these issues are unresolved. And, you know, we saw a 2011 guidance, we commented. We saw a 2016 guidance, we commented. There hasn't been any discussion since. I'm going to give some credit to when Bill Francos was here, and I think Susan Walker may have still been here, and we were working on the GMP rule. And there was a meeting requested that we all come in and sit around tables and talk to each other a line at a time and see if we could get consensus in that kind of framework. You know, the process now is, it's like the doors are closed between us, and we don't have a forum in which we sit and talk to each other. And I don't mean just industry. We would invite the public health agencies, the consumer groups, but I think some of this needs to be resolved in a more of a dialogue than an exchange of papers with months and months or years and years between them, because we do need to get these things resolved if we're going to move forward in the whole issue of recognizing the new dietary ingredients that actually do require notifications. Thank you very much.